Alright, we're going to go over the EPA Type 2 practice test. So I'm going to start with number 1. When inspecting a hermetic system known to be leaking, you should look for what? Okay, and the choices are frost on the tubing, puddles of refrigerant, particles of filter dryer core, or traces of oil. So we can narrow this down a little bit. When you think of something leaking, that means that whatever is inside the system is coming out to the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so the only things in a refrigeration circuit that could be leaking would be refrigerant and oil. Okay, normally you will not see puddles of refrigerant because whenever liquid refrigerant changes pressure, when it goes from a pressurized system out into the atmosphere, it normally instantly vaporizes and turns to vapor just because of the pressure difference. So what you would look for would be traces of oil. So when first inspecting a hermetic system known to be leaking, you should look for traces of oil. Number 2, when a trace gas becomes absolutely necessary, which of the available gases should be used to help locate a leak? And the answer to this would be nitrogen with a trace amount of the system's designed refrigerant. So if you came to a unit that had a leak and you wanted to leak check it, you would look at the data plate on the unit, see what type of refrigerant it takes. You would put maybe an ounce or 2 of refrigerant in it, and then you would pressurize it up to a higher level with nitrogen. Number 3, a chiller for comfort cooling that contains 50 pounds or more of R123 is leaking. Starting in 2019, at what leak rate does the EPA require that the equipment be repaired? And the answer to this is 10%. Okay, and you need to look in the Type 2 section and look at the other leak rates. Okay, there's other types of refrigeration besides comfort cooling. Okay, so you'll have to look in there and you need to find the other different types of refrigeration, and you need to see what their leak rate is. All right, number 4, a comfort cooling appliance containing 50 pounds or more of R22 is found to be leaking beyond the applicable leak rate threshold. Unless granted additional time, how many days do you have to repair the leak and conduct the initial leak verification test? And the answer to that is 30 days. So you have 30 days to fix the leak and do the initial leak verification test. Number 5, how long must owners and operators of regulated appliances normally containing 50 pounds or more of HCFC refrigerant keep records of leak inspections, initial leak rate verification, and follow-up verification test? And that would be 3 years. Okay, anytime you see a question throughout the EPA test, if it has anything to do with keeping records, the answer to that question will be 3 years. Alright, number 6. After refrigerant liquid has been recovered from the appliance, any remaining vapor is removed by the recovery system. So we have liquid refrigerant, okay, and if we pull it all out, there's still vapor in there, and vapor is still refrigerant, so we still have to remove it by the recovery system. Number 7. Why could a recycling or recovery machine that uses a hermetic compressor overheat when drawing deep vacuums? And the answer to this question is the motor relies on the flow of refrigerant through the compressor for cooling. Okay, so your compressor is a motor that has pistons in it, or either a scroll type compression system, and it is connected to a motor. Okay, an electric motor. So how that cools is it pulls the cool vapor, okay, pulls the cool vapor in, and that cool vapor cools that compressor. All right, number 8. What should be done before transferring refrigerant to an empty cylinder? Okay, The answer to this question is the cylinder should be evacuated. So if we go and we decide to pull the refrigerant out of a unit, we need to make sure that our tanks have all the air and non-condensables out of them, because if we want to reuse that refrigerant, we want it to be clean, we want it to be free of non-condensables. Number 9, what steps should be taken before using a recovery unit to remove a charge? And the answer to this question is the service valve positions and recovery oil level should be checked when applicable. Number 10, when should refrigerant be removed from the condenser outlet? Okay, that is when the condenser is below the receiver. Okay, so the receiver is a storage tank for liquid refrigerant. Okay, so if, let's say this bottle right here is the receiver, okay, and let's say that the condenser is right here, okay. So if we got a tank of liquid up here and we got a condenser down here, gravity is going to make that water flow down, okay. So whenever the receiver is above the condenser, that means that gravity is going to force that liquid down, so it'll be easier to recover that refrigerant because gravity is forcing it out, because the receiver has a large amount of refrigerant in it, and it'll all fall down. Okay, so whenever you have a condenser that is below the receiver, you should remove that refrigerant at the condenser outlet. All right, number 11, an operating unit that has a receiver storage tank requires refrigerant system service. When servicing the unit, refrigerant should be pumped down to and isolated in the receiver. Okay, so the receiver is a storage tank for the refrigerant. Okay, so whenever the unit is operating, a large amount of liquid will be in that receiver. Okay, but whenever we have to work on it, there are valves on that receiver that we can use to put all the liquid refrigerant into that receiver. Okay, and that will save a lot of time when we're recovering refrigerant. Okay, because large systems can have hundreds or thousands of pounds of refrigerant in it, and to remove that with a recovery unit would take days. Okay, and if you use the receiver and use the compressor of that system to pump the refrigerant into the receiver, that would cut your time down to maybe 30-40 minutes instead of taking days to get the refrigerant out. So an operating unit that has a receiver / storage tank that requires refrigerant system service, you need to pump down the refrigerant and isolate it in the receiver. Number 12, how long must an HVAC servicing company keep records for each disposed appliance with a charge between 5 and 50 pounds? And that's another one of those that is asking about keeping records, so the answer to that is 3 years. Number 13, which of the following statements about recycling and recovery equipment is false? Okay, the one that is false is purchases of such equipment must be reported to the EPA. So if we buy recovery units, normally now they are all been tested by an EPA approved third party, and they will be to EPA standards, so you do not have to report the purchase of equipment to the EPA. Number 14, you are changing out a compressor of a system containing 40 pounds of R404A. In addition to isolating the compressor, which of the following procedures should you follow? Okay, isolating the compressor would mean that we shut off the two valves, the one that is in the suction line that is entering the compressor, and then on the discharge service valve. We will close both of those up. Okay, that isolates the compressor. That makes it to where the compressor is all by itself. It's separated from the refrigeration circuit. So What you would do is you would shut those valves off, and then all you would have to do is remove the little bit of refrigerant that is in the compressor itself. Okay, and the question here says you are changing out a compressor of a system containing 40 pounds of R4048. In addition to isolating the compressor, which of the following procedures should you follow? And that is evacuate the isolated section of the system to 0 psig, and if the system pressure does not rise after a few minutes, remove the compressor. So anytime we are removing the refrigerant and we get it down to the level on our gauge that it's supposed to be at, we need to wait a few minutes and make sure that no refrigerant is underneath the oil in the compressor, or any liquid is left in there, because when you wait a few minutes, that liquid refrigerant will vaporize and it'll start building pressure up in the system. Okay, so if you wait a few minutes and the pressure does not rise, then you can remove the compressor. Number 15, what should be done after reaching the required recovery vacuum on an appliance? Okay, and that's just like I mentioned there in the last question. You wait at least a few minutes to see if the system pressure rises. So the answer to 15 is wait for at least a few minutes to see if the system pressure rises. Number 16, before making a major repair, technicians must evacuate an appliance or component containing more than 200 pounds of R14A to which of the following levels? And that is 10 inches of Hg vacuum. So that is 10 inches of mercury. Okay. Number 17, when can appliances containing refrigerant be recovered to atmospheric pressure? That is when leaks in the system make recovery to the prescribed level unattainable. So if a unit has a leak and you put a recovery unit on it and you try to pull refrigerant out of it, then you'll be pulling air in also. Okay, so if you know it has a leak, you will evacuate it down to atmospheric pressure. Okay, and that would be to 0 psi, because we do not want it to go into a vacuum. If it goes into a vacuum, we'll suck in air and non-condensables. So the answer to that, number 17, is leaks in the system make recovery to the prescribed level unattainable. Number 18, which of the following repairs would always be considered major under EPA's regulations? Okay, the answer to this is replacement of an evaporator. And this question can be on any of the types of test, okay, on type 1, type 2, or type 3. All right, so a major repair, the EPA's, what they think of as a major repair would be one of the following. It would be the evaporator, the condenser, or the compressor. Okay, those are the three major components in a system. So under EPA's regulations, a major repair would be an evaporator, a condenser, or a compressor. Number 19, when is it against EPA regulations to use system-dependent recovery equipment? System-dependent recovery equipment is a unit that will pull the refrigerant out by using the compressor that's in the system, okay, or either using the pressure that is built up in the system. So system-dependent means it depends on the system to get the refrigerant out of it, okay? So when the appliance contains over 15 pounds of refrigerant, you cannot use a system-dependent recovery equipment device on it, okay? So that's when, the answer to number 19 is when the appliance contains over 15 pounds of refrigerant. Number 20, what is the evaporation temperature of R134A at 0 psig? And you need to get your pressure temperature chart out, and you need to go to 0 psig, and you need to look over, and you will find that it is negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So the answer to 20 is negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. 21. Which of the following is a reason to take an oil sample? And the answer to 21 is that the unit has had a compressor burnout. Okay? A compressor burnout is when the windings in the compressor have either arced or acid has got on them, and it's ate away the coating that's on the windings. And whenever electrical components arc or they short out with one another, it makes a bad smell. So I know you guys have probably smelled burning wires before, and a compressor burnout will have that kind of smell mixed in with the refrigerant and oil. So you're taking that oil sample whenever you have a compressor burnout, and that'll tell you if you have acid in the system. That way that you can take care of it, you can flush the system and get it to where that it can work properly when you put the new component in. All right, number 22. What are refrigeration and air conditioning compressor heaters used for? And the answer to this is to reduce the amount of refrigerant in the oil. So like when we were talking about recovery, and where it says you need to, when you get it down to the required level, you need to wait a few minutes to see if the pressure rises. These heaters that are on the compressors, they heat up the oil, okay? And whenever refrigerant gets heated up, it absorbs that heat and it will evaporate, okay? So this kind of helps with keeping the oil, keeping it warm, keeping the refrigerant out of it, keeping the compressor lubricated better, and it also helps with recovery. All right, number 23. It is best practice to use dry nitrogen to break the vacuum when dehydrating by triple evacuation method. However, the answer to this is it requires a pressure regulator. So nitrogen, the tank pressure is normally well over 2,000 psi. So if we just took the hose to a tank of nitrogen and we turned it on, our hoses would blow up, okay? They would burst open, because the hoses on the gauges that we use are rated for 800 psi, okay? So if we put 2,000 psi on those hoses, they would pop. So it requires a pressure regulator to regulate that high pressure down to a pressure that we can work with our equipment. 24. Every refrigerating system must be protected by which of the following? The answer to that is a pressure relief device, okay? And number 25. Pressure relief valves can only be installed in parallel, okay? So guys, you need to study this. You need to go to your Type 2 section in the preparatory manual and go over some of the different leak rate percentages, and just go over it and read it. And if there's any information that you see in the manual that I haven't went over in this book, you might want to kind of read over it a few times and try to remember what you read, okay? So, like I said, just keep studying, and we will be doing a retake on this test come Monday, okay? So everybody be ready to take this test again Monday. All right, have a good weekend.